I spent 40 years building a world where my children would never have to touch the dirt, only to have them tell me I wasn't clean enough to stand in their light. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. The morning air in the workshop didn't just feel cold, it felt ancient. It was a 4 a.m. cold that seeped through the cracks in the corrugated tin roof, a chill that seemed to settle directly into Zaha's marrow. At 68, his body was a living ledger of every debt he had ever paid on behalf of his children. His spine, once straight and proud as a young immigrant father, was now a curved question mark. His knees popped like dry kindling as he shifted his weight on a rusted metal stool that had been his only throne for 4 decades. Zaha reached for a rag, his thick, calloused fingers moving with a practiced, heavy rhythm. These hands were a map of his history. There were jagged white scars on his forearms from the steel mills of the late 80s, a permanent tremor from decades of operating heavy machinery, and skin that was permanently stained with the gray ghosts of engine oil. No amount of pumice soap or boiling water could ever truly wash the work out of him. He was a man made of grease, grit, and the quiet determination to ensure his children never had to know what grease felt like. He held a small, silver-framed photograph, its edges tarnished by the humid air of the shop. In the photo, Leo and Arya were barely 7 and 5. They were standing on a sun-drenched pier, their faces smeared with melting chocolate ice cream, grinning at the camera with the absolute certainty that the world was a safe, beautiful place. Zaha remembered that day. He remembered the phantom itch of the extra double shift he had worked just to afford that weekend trip. He remembered how his boots had been falling apart, the soles flapping with every step, while the children wore brand-new sneakers. He hadn't cared. To him, their smiles were the only currency that mattered. Back then, they looked at him as if he were a giant who could catch the moon if they asked for it. Now, sitting in the dim glow of a single flickering overhead bulb, Zaha felt less like a giant and more like a ghost, a relic haunting the edges of the polished, porcelain lives he had spent his life's blood to build. The silence of the shop was shattered by the sharp, electronic chirp of his phone. The sound felt violent in the stillness. Zaha set the photo down, his thumb lingering for a second over the glass, and reached for the device. His heart gave a small, traitorous flutter of hope. Perhaps it was Leo, calling to see if he'd found a tie for the wedding. Perhaps it was Arya, checking to see if his old truck would make the 3-hour drive to the estate. It was a text from Arya. He squinted, his eyes struggling with the bright glare of the screen. He hadn't updated his prescription in 5 years because Leo's law school bar exam fees had taken precedence. "Listen, Dad," the message began. The opening was a cold wall of ice. "Leo and I had a long, serious talk last night. We're both at points in our careers where we're finally moving into the circles we belong in. We can't be held back by obligations that don't fit our trajectory anymore. We've seen how you're slowing down, the way you've been complaining about your back, and we want to be clear, we won't be your caretakers. We have lives, travel plans, and high-stakes reputations to maintain. You need to figure out your own arrangements for the future. Don't look to us for help. Deal with old age alone. And for heaven's sake, don't bring this up or act needy at the wedding tomorrow. Just deal with it." Zaha didn't move. He didn't breathe. He simply stared at the words until they burned into his retinas. Deal with old age alone. The sentence felt like a physical weight, a suffocating pressure against his lungs. He thought of the $425,000. It wasn't just a number in a digital ledger. It was 40 years of skipped lunches. It was the winter of 2004 when he wore a threadbare coat and stuffed newspaper into his shoes to keep out the slush so Arya could have the private violin lessons that got her into the conservatory. It was the 3 years he worked 3 separate jobs: janitor, mechanic, and night watchman, sleeping only 4 hours a night in his truck, just so Leo could graduate from an Ivy League university without a single cent of debt. He looked around his workshop. It was a humble, crumbling space. He lived in the small apartment above it, where the radiator hissed like a dying snake and the floorboards groaned under the weight of his loneliness. He lived this way so they wouldn't have to. He had spent his life building a golden bridge to a world he wasn't allowed to enter, and now that they were safely on the other side, they were setting fire to the bridge while he was still standing on it. A few miles away, nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, the Gilded Oaks estate was a different universe. Here, the air smelled of expensive lilies and imported champagne. Leo stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting a silk tuxedo that cost more than Zaha's first 3 cars combined. He was surrounded by groomsmen, men with names like Sterling and Harrison, who spoke in the clipped, effortless tones of people who had never had to worry about a utility bill. "Is your father coming tomorrow, Leo?" one of them asked, swirling a glass of 20-year-old scotch. "I heard he's a bit of a character. A man of the earth, right? Does he still run that little repair shop?" Leo felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. It wasn't the heat of pride, it was the searing burn of shame. He caught sight of Elena, his fiancée, in the reflection of the glass. She was across the room, resplendent in a custom lace gown, directing a fleet of florists with the cold precision of a diamond cutter. Elena came from a family where names were etched on the wings of hospitals. To her, a man like Zaha wasn't a father-in-law. He was a liability. He was a visual stain on the curated perfection of her life. "He'll be there," Leo muttered, his voice thin. He couldn't look his friends in the eye. "But he'll stay in the background. He doesn't really navigate these social waters well. He's more comfortable with his tools." Elena walked over, her heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. She adjusted Leo's cufflinks, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. "I've seen the seating chart, Leo. I moved him to table 22. It's near the service entrance. It's better that way. He won't feel overwhelmed, and he won't be in the way of the photographers." Leo didn't protest. He thought of the text Arya had sent earlier. He had helped her draft it. He felt a momentary pang of guilt, a tiny flicker of the boy who once thought his dad could catch the moon, but he suppressed it. "He's an adult," Leo told himself. "He's lived his life. We shouldn't have to sacrifice our peak years for his decline." Back in the workshop, Zaha slowly stood up. He didn't reply to Arya's text. To reply would be to beg, and Zaha had forgotten how to beg a long time ago. He walked over to a heavy, fireproof safe tucked behind a stack of weathered Continental tires. With trembling fingers, he punched in a code. It was the birth dates of his children, the only numbers that had ever truly mattered to him. The door creaked open with a mournful groan. Inside was a simple, faded manila folder. It didn't contain gold bars or diamonds. It contained the paper trail of a miracle. There were the records of the secret trust funds he had funneled every spare penny into for 30 years. There was the deed to the townhouse Leo lived in, purchased through an anonymous holding company Zaha had set up so his son would feel the pride of independence while never facing the fear of a mortgage. There were the wire transfer receipts for Arya's boutique art gallery. The investment, she thought, came from a mysterious patron of the arts. For years, Zaha had lied to them. He told them the money came from lucky early investments or small inheritances from distant relatives. He had wanted them to feel entitled to their success. He wanted them to walk with their heads high, never knowing their father had bled and bruised for every brick in their foundations. He had protected them from the truth of his struggle, and in doing so, he had accidentally raised monsters who despised the very scent of his labor. He touched the edge of a receipt for $150,000. The final payment for this very wedding. Elena's dream day was being funded by the man she wanted to hide by the kitchen door. "Deal with it alone," he whispered to the empty, oil-scented room. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a group chat notification. Elena had posted a photo of the Gilded Oaks estate lit up at night. The caption read, "Finally, a night where everything is perfect, surrounded only by those who truly belong." A wave of profound, weary clarity washed over Zaha. He looked at his work clothes hanging on a peg, the navy blue coveralls with Zaha embroidered in faded red thread. They were stained, yes. They were worn, but they were the only things in his life that hadn't lied to him. He realized then that he had spent 68 years being what they needed him to be. A provider, a safety net, a silent ATM. Tomorrow, for the first time in his life, he would show up as exactly who he was. Reflection and CTA 1. The deepest pain a parent can feel isn't physical. It's the realization that they've become a stranger to the children they would die for. Have you ever felt like your family only values what you provide, rather than who you are? Share your story in the comments below. I'm here to listen. Zaha closed the safe, but this time, he didn't turn the dial to lock it. He didn't need to protect those secrets anymore. The weight was off his shoulders because the silence had finally become too loud to bear. He wouldn't fight for a seat at table 22. He would simply remind them who owned the estate in the first place. He picked up his phone, deleted the draft of a heart-wrenching plea he had started to write to Arya, and set the device face down on the workbench. He had work to do. He had a suit to iron, not a tuxedo, not a costume to blend in with the elitists, but the one clean, honest suit he had bought for his wife's funeral 10 years ago. The storm was coming to the Gilded Oaks, and Zaha was no longer afraid of the rain. The night before the wedding did not bring sleep to the workshop. Zaha spent the hours between midnight and dawn in a state of quiet, focused preparation. The furnace hummed a low, mechanical tune, a sound that usually comforted him, but tonight it felt like a ticking clock. Every hour that passed was a step closer to the final collapse of the lie he had lived for 40 years. He pulled out a heavy wooden chest from beneath his workbench. It was covered in a thick layer of gray dust, the kind that accumulates only over decades of being ignored. Inside weren't tools or parts, but mementos. He pulled out a small, knitted baby blanket, yellow, now faded to a pale cream. It was the blanket he had wrapped Arya in when he brought her home from the hospital. He remembered the terrifying weight of her in his arms, the way his calloused fingers felt too rough for her velvet skin. On that day, he had made a silent vow. You will never know the cold I have known. You will never know the hunger. He realized now, with a bitterness that tasted like copper, that he had succeeded too well. By shielding them from the cold, he had ensured they never learned the value of warmth. By shielding them from hunger, he had raised children who were perpetually starved for status, never realizing that the bread they ate was baked with their father's sweat. He moved to the small kitchenette in the corner of his workshop. He made a cup of black coffee, the steam rising to meet his weary face. As he sipped the bitter brew, his mind drifted back to a specific winter, the winter of '98. The economy had buckled, and the mill had shuttered. He remembered standing in the middle of this very shop, the power cut off, the air so cold he could see his breath in the dark. He had $200 left in the world. Leo needed a specific, expensive laptop for his high school computer science program, and the rent was due. Zaha had sat in the dark for 6 hours, weighing his children's future against his own survival. He chose them. He always chose them. He pawned his grandfather's gold watch, the only thing he owned that had any beauty, to pay the rent, and he took a third job scrubbing grease pits at the truck stop from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. He never told them. When Leo got the laptop, he simply complained that the processing speed wasn't as fast as his friends. Zaha had just smiled, leaned against the doorframe, and said, "I'll try to do better next time, son." "Do better," Zaha whispered to the empty workshop, a ghostly laugh escaping his lips. "I did too much." Across town, the Gilded Oaks was alive with the sound of a pre-wedding gala. The champagne fountains were flowing, and the string quartet played a soft, haunting melody. Arya was holding court in the center of a circle of young professionals, her laughter ringing out like crystal. "Oh, Dad," she said, answering a question from a colleague. "He's complicated. He's very set in his ways. He prefers his workshop to people. We tried to integrate him, really, but he's just more comfortable in his own little world. It's sad, but you can't force someone to evolve if they don't want to." She checked her phone. No reply from her father. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. Typical, she thought. He's probably sulking because I told him the truth. He always plays the martyr. She didn't see the irony. She didn't see that her evolution was funded by the unevolved man she was currently mocking. She turned back to her friends, tucking a strand of perfectly styled hair behind her ear, a hairstyle that cost more than her father's monthly grocery budget. Zaha stood before the small, cracked mirror in his bathroom. He had shaved with a steady hand, despite the tremor. He put on his suit. It was a charcoal gray wool, slightly out of style, but impeccably clean. It smelled faintly of cedar and the lavender sachets his wife, Martha, used to tuck into the closet before she passed away 10 years ago. He looked at himself, really looked at himself, for the first time in years. He saw a man who had been hollowed out. He had given his strength to Leo's career, his joy to Arya's happiness, and his health to their comfort. What was left? He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the banking app, a simple, utilitarian interface. He looked at the balance of the primary account, the one that fed the various trust funds and anonymous gifts. $425,000. It was the in-game fund. He had planned to reveal it tomorrow as a wedding gift, a final, "I love you," that would ensure his children and their future families would never want for anything. But the text message from Aria was still there, glowing like a radioactive wound. "We won't be your caretakers. Deal with old age alone." His thumb hovered over the transfer button. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment of the choice, mentioned in the ancient stories he used to read to them. He didn't hit the button. Not yet. He wanted to see their faces first. He wanted to see if there was a single spark of the children he once knew left in those polished, hollow shells. He picked up his car keys, the keys to an old, battered Ford that groaned when it started. He walked out of the workshop, turning off the single light. For the first time in 40 years, the shop was completely dark. As he drove toward the gilded oaks, the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. He drove past the fancy boutiques where Arya shopped, past the glass and steel office building where Leo worked. He felt like a stranger in a city he had built with his own hands. He reached the gates of the estate. The security guard, a young man in a crisp uniform, looked at Zaha's old truck with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Deliveries are in the back, pal," the guard said, not even looking up from his clipboard. Zaha rolled down the window. The cold morning air rushed in. "I'm not a delivery," Zaha said, his voice low and steady. "I'm the father of the groom." The guard looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing the old suit and the battered truck. He gave a skeptical smirk, but checked the list. "Table 22? Yeah, all right. Follow the service road to the left. Parking for overflow guests is behind the stables." Zaha nodded. He didn't take offense. Why should he? The guard was just seeing what his children had told the world to see. He parked the truck in the dirt lot behind the stables, far away from the Ferraris and Porsches lining the main drive. He stepped out, the gravel crunching under his dress shoes. He smoothed his jacket, took a deep breath, and began the long walk toward the glittering white tent where the glittering circle awaited. He wasn't going there to beg for a seat at the table. He was going there to witness the end of an era. Zaha is walking into the lion's den, armed only with the truth. Do you think he's doing the right thing by showing up? Or should he have just disappeared and cut them off silently? I want to hear your take. This is where the drama gets real. Drop a comment below. The music was getting louder. He could hear the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and then, cutting through the air like a siren, the high, sharp scream of Elena, the bride-to-be. What is he doing here? Someone get him out of the photos. Zaha stopped. He stood on the edge of the manicured lawn, a gray figure against a sea of white and gold. The emotional spark had arrived. The Gilded Oaks estate was a masterpiece of manufactured perfection. Thousands of white hydrangeas had been imported and arranged in towering columns that lined the aisle, creating a tunnel of ivory that led to a marble altar. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the expensive, powdery perfume of 300 high society guests. To anyone else, it was a dream. To Zaha, as he stepped onto the manicured grass, it felt like a funeral for a family that didn't know it was dead yet. Zaha walked slowly. Every step on that pristine lawn felt like an intrusion. He could feel the eyes of the guests sliding over him like oil on water. He was a charcoal gray smudge on a canvas of silk and linen. He reached the edge of the seating area just as the professional photographers were positioning the wedding party for the pre-ceremony legacy photos. Elena stood at the center, a vision of lace and cold ambition. Her dress was a custom piece, flowing around her like a white cloud, but her face was as hard as the diamonds around her neck. She was laughing at something Leo said until her gaze shifted. Her eyes locked onto Zaha, and the laughter died instantly, replaced by a look of pure, visceral disgust. "Stop. Stop right now." Elena's voice cut through the ambient music of the string quartet. It wasn't a whisper, it was a command. The photographers paused. The guests turned. A heavy, expectant silence fell over the lawn, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling above the trees. "Leo, look at your father," Elena hissed, her finger pointing at Zaha as if he were a stray animal that had wandered onto a film set. "He's wearing, what is that? Is that wool?" It looks like it's been in a basement for 20 years. And his hands. Leo, look at his hands. They're filthy. Zaha stood still. He didn't hide his hands. He didn't tuck them into his pockets. He let them hang at his sides, thick, scarred, and stained with the work that had paid for the very ground Elena was standing on. Leo stepped forward, his face a mask of deep, burning embarrassment. He didn't look at Zaha's eyes. He looked at his own polished shoes. Dad, I told you to stay back. I told you table 22 was where you'd be comfortable. Why are you walking through the main garden? I wanted to see my son, Zaha said. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the estate, it carried to the back rows of the seating. I wanted to see you before the vows. See him? Elena stepped forward, her heels sinking into the soft turf. Her face was contorted. You're ruining the aesthetic. Do you have any idea how much these photographers cost per hour? Do you know who is here today? The CEO of the firm Leo is sitting in the third row. My parents' investors are here. And you show up looking like a common mechanic. I am a mechanic, Zaha said simply. Leave this place at once. Elena suddenly screamed. The sound was jarring, a jagged tear in the fabric of the elegant mourning. You are a disgrace. You're a stain on this family. If you had any dignity, you'd realize you don't belong here. Go back to your workshop, hide in your grease, and stay away from my wedding. The crowd gasped. A few people shielded their eyes, others whispered behind their programs. Arya stepped forward then, her face a mirror of Elena's disdain. She didn't defend her father. She didn't even acknowledge the cruelty of the scream. She's right, Dad, Arya said, her voice dripping with a calculated, professional pity. You're making a scene. We sent you that text for a reason. We're moving forward. You're the past. Please, just go before you embarrass us any further. We'll talk about your living situation later. Just go. Zaha looked at Leo. Is this what you want, son? Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at Elena's furious beauty. He looked at his wealthy friends watching him, waiting to see if he was one of them, or if he belonged to the old man in the charcoal suit. He chose the lie. Go home, Dad, Leo said, his voice cold and flat. You don't belong at table 22. You don't belong here at all. Zaha felt it then, the emotional spark. It wasn't a flame of anger. It was a cold, crystalline snap of the heart. The last thread of the giant he once was finally broke. He felt lighter, suddenly, as if the weight of 40 years of sacrifice had simply evaporated, leaving behind a vacuum of pure, unadulterated truth. I understand, Zaha said. He didn't turn to run. He didn't bow his head. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. The crowd watched, confused, as the disgraceful, old man calmly tapped a few icons on his screen. What are you doing? Elena demanded, her voice rising again. I told you to leave. Security. Two large men in black suits began to move toward Zaha from the perimeter of the tent. I'm leaving, Zaha said, his thumb hovering over the final confirm button on his banking app. But before I go, I think it's time we settle the accounts. You see, Elena, you're right about one thing. This wedding is built on a specific aesthetic. But aesthetics are expensive. He looked at Leo. The $150,000 for this venue, the $80,000 for the catering, the $40,000 for that dress your fiancé is wearing. You told everyone it came from an inheritance from your mother's side. Leo's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. Dad, don't. There was no inheritance, Zaha said, his voice gaining a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Your mother died with $200 in her savings account because we spent everything on your tutors. Every penny for this glittering day came from my safe. Every cent Arya used to buy her gallery came from my workshop. $425,000 in total over the last 3 years. Arya stepped back as if he had physically struck her. That's a lie. You're just a mechanic. You don't have that kind of money. I didn't, Zaha agreed. But a man who works 80 hours a week for 40 years, who never buys a new shirt, who never takes a vacation, and who invests every spare dollar into the market with the patience of a saint, that man can build a kingdom for his children. But he shouldn't be surprised when those children become tyrants. Zaha looked at the screen of his phone. I just hit cancel on the pending wire transfer for the final installments to the vendors. And I just initiated a recall on the gift funds for the townhouse and the gallery based on the moral clause in the trust one secretly established. You what? Elena whispered. The vendors will be looking for payment by noon today, Leo. I believe the balance is roughly $210,000, Zaha said. He tucked the phone back into his pocket. Since you won't be my caretaker and I need to deal with old age alone, I've decided I'm going to need every penny of that $425,000 for my own arrangements. After all, nursing homes are expensive. The security guards reached Zaha. They stopped, looking at Leo for instructions. Leo was staring at Elena. Elena was staring at the photographers, who were now recording every second of the meltdown. The perfect facade wasn't just cracking, it was shattering into a million jagged pieces. The high society guests were no longer looking at Zaha with disgust. They were looking at the wedding party with the predatory curiosity of people watching a car crash. "Dad, wait," Leo called out, his voice cracking. "We can talk about this." Elena didn't mean it. She's just stressed. "Oh, she meant it," Zaha said, finally turning his back on them. "And so did Arya. And so did you, Leo, because you stood there and let her say it. You wanted the fruit, but you were ashamed of the roots. Well, the roots have decided to stop feeding the tree." Zaha began to walk away. His gait was steadier now. Past his prime, Mechanic walked with the grace of a man who had finally put down a burden that wasn't his to carry. "Get back here," Elena screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. "You can't do this. The flowers. The cake. My father's reputation." Zaha didn't look back. He walked past the hydrangeas, past the string quartet that had stopped playing, and past the rows of stunned millionaires. He walked all the way to the dirt lot behind the stables. As he reached his old truck, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. "Transfer successful. Account balance, $425,000. He climbed into the driver's seat. The engine groaned, sputtered, and then roared to life. An honest, mechanical sound that cut through the silence of the morning. He put the truck in gear and drove out of the Gilded Oaks. In his rearview mirror, he saw Leo running down the driveway, his expensive silk coattails flapping in the wind, a desperate figure chasing a ghost. Zaha didn't slow down. He had spent his whole life making sure they were ahead of him. Now, for the first time, he was the one leaving them behind. The emotional core had been hit. The bomb had landed. And as Zaha drove toward the horizon, he felt a strange, quiet sensation in his chest. It was the first breath of air he had taken in 40 years that didn't taste like sacrifice. The truth is a powerful weapon, but it often leaves everyone bleeding. Did Zaha go too far by ruining the wedding? Or did his children deserve to lose everything the moment they disowned him? I'm dying to know whose side you're on. Tell me in the comments. Zaha reached the main road. He didn't go back to the workshop. He turned the truck toward the coast. He had never seen the ocean in the morning. He had always been too busy working. Behind him, the Gilded Oaks was in chaos. The perfect wedding had become the great reckoning. And the man who had built it all was finally, for the first time in his life, going to have breakfast on his own terms. He looked at the empty passenger seat where his wife used to sit. "I tried, Martha," he whispered. "I really tried. But it's time to be just Zaha again." The road stretched out before him, long and open. The silence was no longer heavy. It was a canvas, and he finally had the brush. The aftermath of a bomb is rarely a clean silence. It is a ringing, disorienting static. At the Gilded Oaks, that static was the sound of 300 elite guests whispering behind lace-gloved hands as they watched the catering manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, approach the altar with a clipboard and a face like a funeral director. Leo stood frozen, the silk of his tuxedo now feeling like a straitjacket. Elena was collapsed on a white velvet chair, her custom gown, the one Zaha had paid for in full just 48 hours ago, sprawled around her like the wreckage of a fallen parachute. "Mr. Vance," Henderson said, his voice loud enough to be heard by the first 5 rows. "I've just received a notification that the final wire transfer for the venue and the staffing has been retracted. The system is showing a stop payment order. We require a credit card on file immediately for the remaining $210,000, or we will have to suspend all service, including the reception dinner." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena looked at Leo, her eyes wide and wet. "Leo, fix it. Tell him it's a mistake. Call your father. Tell that old man to stop this game." "It's not a game, Elena," Arya hissed, stepping into the circle. Her face was a mask of calculated panic. She was frantically tapping on her own phone, trying to access her business account. The account for the gallery she had bragged was a soaring success. Her screen glowed red. Account restricted. Contact administrator. He's locked everything. Arya whispered, her voice trembling. The trust, the anonymous donor account, it's all gone. Leo, he wasn't lying. Every brick of my gallery, every shipment of art I've bought for the spring show, he was the one signing the checks. I don't believe it. Elena screamed, standing up and nearly tripping on her train. He's a mechanic. He works in a garage. He's just trying to humiliate me because I told him the truth. Leo, call him. Now. Leo pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He dialed Zaha's number. Ring, ring, ring. Pick up, Dad. Please, just pick up, Leo muttered under his breath. Voicemail, this is Zaha. Leave a message. Leo hung up and dialed again. And again, and again. The resistance was beginning. In their minds, this was just a tantrum. They couldn't accept that the man they had spent years belittling was the source of their entire reality. They convinced themselves that if they could just get him on the phone, they could manipulate him. They would apologize, just enough to get the money back, and then go back to their lives. Zaha, however, was miles away. He had turned off his ringer the moment he hit the main highway. He was currently sitting in a small, weathered diner overlooking a gray, churning ocean. The smell of frying bacon and cheap, burnt coffee was more honest than any lily-scented estate. He watched the waves. They didn't care about social standing. They didn't care about $425,000. They just rolled in and out, consistent and relentless. Zaha felt a strange kinship with the tide. He had spent 40 years rolling in to provide, and now he was rolling out. His phone sat on the table next to his coffee. It lit up every 30 seconds. Leo calling. Arya calling. Message from Elena. You are a monster. You're ruining my life. Put the money back. Zaha didn't feel the urge to reply. For the first time, their desperation didn't feel like his responsibility. He remembered a night when Leo was 10 and had failed a math test. Leo had cried for hours, and Zaha had sat with him, doing every problem over and over until the sun came up, even though Zaha had to be at the mill by 6 a.m. He had made Leo's failures his own for decades. No more, he thought, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Back at the Gilded Oaks, the resistance was turning into a desperate, ugly defense. We don't need him, Elena was shouting at the catering manager. My father is a partner at a law firm. We'll pay the balance. Just keep the bar open. People are starting to leave. But her father, a man who prided himself on perception, was already walking toward his car. He didn't want to be associated with a financial scandal. Elena, darling, her father said, his voice cold. If Leo's family is in this much debt to a mechanic, then the Vance family is not what we were told. I will not be writing a check for a wedding that is already a joke in the eyes of my peers. We're leaving. Dad. No, Elena wailed. The social hierarchy was collapsing. The guests, realizing the free champagne was about to stop, were making their exits in a sea of rustling silk and hurried apologies. The high society Elena had worshipped was abandoning her like rats from a sinking ship. Arya grabbed Leo's arm, her nails digging into his silk sleeve. We have to go to the workshop. He's there. He's hiding there, waiting for us to come crawling. He wants to see us beg, Leo. That's what this is. It's a power play. Is it? Leo asked, his voice hollow. He looked around at the empty chairs, the half-eaten appetizers, and the flowers that were already beginning to wilt in the afternoon heat. Or is he just done? He can't be done. Arya snapped. We're his children. He has to support us. It's what parents do. He's just an old man with a grudge. We'll go there. We'll tell him how much he's hurt us, and he'll cave. He always caves. That was the lie they clung to. The resistance was built on the belief that Zaha's love was a weakness they could always exploit. They couldn't fathom a world where the silent provider spoke his final word. They left the estate in Leo's car, a German luxury vehicle that was technically a lease paid for by Zaha's workshop account. They drove fast, the silence in the car thick with resentment. Elena sat in the back, her wedding dress stuffed into the seat like a crumpled napkin, her makeup streaked with tears of rage. When we get there, Elena said, her voice sharp as a razor, I'm going to tell him that if he doesn't fix this, he'll never see his grandchildren. I'll make sure he dies alone in that filthy shop. Leo didn't say anything. He was looking at the fuel gauge. He realized he didn't even have his own credit card in his wallet. It was a company card linked to the firm Zaha was secretly funding. They reached the workshop an hour later. The sun was starting to dip, casting long, skeletal shadows across the gravel lot. The Zaha sign hung crookedly over the door. The lights were off. The heavy padlocks were in place. Arya jumped out before the car even stopped. She ran to the door and pounded on it with her fists. "Dad, open the door. We know you're in there. Stop this childish nonsense. You've made your point, okay? Everyone is talking. You've embarrassed us enough." Leo walked up behind her, his movements sluggish. He looked at the safe Zaha had left open the night before. He peered through the window and saw it. The empty shelves, the lack of the manila folder. "He's not here, Arya," Leo said quietly. "Then where is he?" she screamed, turning to face him. "He has no friends. He has no life. He lives here. He is this shop. Is he?" Leo looked at the shop. He realized he hadn't been inside this building in 3 years. He didn't know what his father's favorite food was. He didn't know what he did on Sundays. He only knew that the shop was where the money came from. Elena stepped out of the car, her white heels sinking into the oil-stained gravel. She looked at the workshop with a sneer of pure hatred. "Look at this place. This is where he's been hiding. This is where the money came from. It's disgusting. He's a hoarder. A dirty, selfish old hoarder." "Shut up, Elena," Leo said. It was the first time he had ever spoken to her with anything but adoration. "What did you say to me?" "I said shut up. We're standing in the dirt because of us, not him." Leo's voice cracked. "He gave us everything, and we sent him a text telling him to deal with old age alone. What did you think was going to happen? I thought he'd be a father." Arya yelled. "I thought he'd care about our success." "He did care," Leo said, pointing at the empty shop. "He cared so much he erased himself so we could be somebody. And the moment we became somebody, we decided he was nobody." Arya kicked the door. "I don't care about the philosophy, Leo. I care about the $425,000. If he doesn't move that money back, my gallery closes on Monday. I have contracts. I'll be sued. Then I guess you'll have to deal with it alone," a voice said from the shadows. They all spun around. A man was walking toward them from the edge of the lot. For a second, Leo's heart leaped. But it wasn't Zaha. It was Old Man Miller, the owner of the scrapyard next door, a man who had been Zaha's only friend for 30 years. "Zaha's gone," Miller said, spitting a bit of tobacco onto the ground. "He stopped by my place this morning, handed me the keys to the shop, told me to sell off the equipment and give the proceeds to the local orphanage." He did what?" Arya gasped. "That equipment is worth thousands. That's our inheritance." "He said he already gave you your inheritance," Miller said, his eyes narrow and hard as he looked at the three of them in their wedding finery. "He said he gave you 40 years of his life, and you told him it wasn't enough. So he's taking the rest for himself." "Where did he go?" Leo stepped forward, desperation leaking out of his pores. "Miller, please. Where is he?" Miller leaned against the fence, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "He didn't say, but he did leave a message for you. Especially for you, Leo." "What is it?" He said, "The bill is due. And for the first time in your life, you're going to have to work to pay it." Elena let out a guttural scream of frustration. Arya began to sob, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage. They were still resisting. They were still looking for a way to blame the man who had given them everything. They stood in the dark, oil-stained lot, dressed in thousands of dollars of silk and lace, while the world they knew dissolved into the twilight. Zaha was gone, and the silent architect had taken the blueprints with him. It's easy to call someone family when they're footing the bill, but the real test is when the money disappears. Do you think Leo and Arya are finally starting to realize their mistake, or are they just upset that their ATM has closed? Let's talk about the difference between regret and remorse in the comments. The wind began to pick up, whistling through the empty rafters of the workshop. It was a cold wind, the kind Zaha had lived with his entire life. Now, it was his children's turn to feel the chill. Resistance was crumbling. The reality of a world without Zaha was starting to set in, and it was a world that didn't care about their aesthetic. The gilded oaks had long since gone dark, but for Leo, Arya, and Elena, the nightmare was only entering its second act. They weren't in a palace anymore. They were huddled in the cramped, neon-lit lobby of a Blue Star roadside motel, 30 miles from the city. Leo's car, the sleek German lease that Zaha had stopped paying for, had been remotely disabled by the dealership's payment protection software halfway through their frantic search for their father. It was a humiliating irony. They were stranded. Leo sat on a vinyl chair that smelled of old cigarettes, his silk tuxedo jacket stained with coffee. Arya was pacing the 3 feet of cracked linoleum, her phone still pressed to her ear like a lifeline to a world that was rapidly hanging up on her. Elena sat on her suitcase, her wedding dress now a gray, tangled mess in a trash bag she'd bought from a gas station. "He can't just leave us here," Elena hissed, her voice cracking. "My father's firm is going to be ruined by the gossip." "Leo, do you have any money? Even a credit card that works?" "I told you, Elena," Leo said, his voice hollow. "Everything was tied to the workshop's business account. Every card in my wallet is a piece of useless plastic now. I have $42 in cash and a watch I can't sell until a pawn shop opens on Monday." "We need to find him," Arya said, stopping her pacing. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Not for the money this time. We need him to sign the release forms for the gallery's inventory. If he doesn't, the artists will sue me for theft because the patron, him, technically owns the titles. I'll go to jail, Leo. I'll actually go to jail." This was the forced proximity of their new reality. They were bound together by a crisis they couldn't buy their way out of. For the first time in their lives, they were experiencing what Zaha had felt every day for 40 years, the crushing weight of a problem that couldn't be solved with a swipe of a card. Miller said he went to the coast. Leo remembered. He mentioned a place, a Blue Horizon cottage. Mom used to talk about it. It's a tiny fishing village 4 hours north. "Then we go there," Arya said. "We hitchhike. We walk. I don't care. If we don't find him before the banks open on Monday morning, we lose everything." While his children were unraveling in a motel lobby, Zaha was sitting on the porch of a weathered shingle cottage that smelled of salt and cedar. The Blue Horizon wasn't a luxury resort. It was a place of peeling paint and screen doors that hummed in the wind. He was wearing an old flannel shirt, one he'd kept in a box for a decade. It felt soft against his skin, unlike the stiff wool of his funeral suit. He had a small radio playing low-volume jazz, and a bowl of soup he'd made himself on a 2-burner stove. He looked at his hands. For the first time in his life, the grease was starting to fade. The skin was pink and raw underneath, as if he were shedding a shell. He felt a strange sense of mourning, not for his children, but for the man he used to be, the man who thought his only value was his utility. He knew they would come. He knew his children better than they knew themselves. He knew that Arya's gallery was tied to his signature. He knew Leo's car had a kill switch. He hadn't done these things out of malice. He had done them to ensure that when the reckoning came, they would have no choice but to see him. Not as a bank, but as a person. He was waiting for them, not with a checkbook, but with the truth. The journey to the coast was a descent into the real world for the trio. They had managed to convince a truck driver to give them a lift in exchange for Leo's expensive cufflinks. Sitting in the back of a refrigerated trailer, shivering in their wedding finery, the social divide they had so carefully constructed was obliterated. "I hate him," Elena whispered, hugging her knees. "I hate that old man for doing this." "Do you?" Leo asked. He was looking at his hands in the dim light of the truck. They were clean, soft. He'd never had a blister in his life. He looked at Arya, who was shivering. "We told him to deal with old age alone, Elena. We told him he was a disgrace at the wedding. If someone said that to you, would you keep paying their rent?" "It's different," Elena snapped. "He's the father. He's supposed to take it." "Why?" Leo's voice was a whisper. "Because he's a mechanic? Because he doesn't have a pedigree? We treated him like a piece of equipment, Elena. Like a furnace that was supposed to keep us warm without us ever having to throw a log on the fire." Arya didn't speak. She was looking at a photo on her phone, not of her gallery, but an old one she'd found in her deleted folder. It was Zaha, standing in the rain, holding an umbrella over her while she walked into her high school graduation. He was soaked to the bone, his shoulders hunched, but he was looking at her with such intense, quiet pride that it hurt to see it now. She remembered that day. She had been embarrassed because his umbrella was old and rusty. She had run to join her friends without even saying thank you. The truck hissed to a stop at a gas station near the coast. "This is as far as I go, kids," the driver said. They stepped out into the biting sea air. The sun was just beginning to rise, a pale, sickly yellow over the Atlantic. They had walked 3 miles down a winding dirt road before they saw the cottage. And there he was. Zaha was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked smaller than they remembered. Without the giant shadow of the workshop, he looked like what he was, a 68-year-old man who was very, very tired. Arya was the first to reach the porch. She didn't scream. She didn't demand. She just stood at the bottom of the steps, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Dad," she whispered. Zaha didn't look up immediately. He took a slow sip of his coffee. The silence was deafening, filled only by the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the screen door in the wind. "The inventory release, Dad," Arya said, her voice trembling. "They're going to sue me. They're saying the gallery is a fraud because the funding source vanished. Please, just sign the papers. You can keep the rest of the money. Just don't let them take my name." Leo stepped up beside her. He looked at the flannel shirt Zaha was wearing. "The car stopped, Dad. We had to hitchhike in a fridge truck." Zaha finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were something much worse. They were indifferent. "I told you," Zaha said, his voice raspy from the salt air. "I'm dealing with old age alone. That means my signatures, my assets, and my time belong to me now. If your gallery is a fraud, Arya, it's because you built it on a lie. You told the world you were a self-made success. I'm just helping you make that true. From this moment on, you are entirely self-made. You can't do this." Elena pushed past Leo, her face contorted. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to our reputation? My family name is being dragged through the mud because of your ego." Zaha set his coffee down. He stood up slowly, his joints groaning. He walked to the edge of the porch and looked down at Elena. "Reputation," Zaha said softly. "You think a name is something you inherit? You think it's something you wear like that dress? A name is something you build with your hands. My name is on every bridge in this county. My name is on every engine that still runs after 20 years. My name means honesty." "What does your name mean, Elena? Besides expensive?" "Leo, do something." Elena turned to her fiancé. But Leo wasn't looking at Elena. He was looking at the small table next to Zaha's chair. On it sat a single, faded photograph of their mother, Martha. Next to it was a small, handwritten ledger. Leo reached out and picked up the ledger. He opened it. October 12, 2012. Aria's tuition, $22,000. Sold the vintage lathe. January 4th, 2015. Leo's bar exam prep, $5,000. Worked triple shift at the mill. May 20th, 2024. The townhouse down payment, $100,000. Liquidated the retirement annuity. The entries went back decades. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a diary of a man's disappearance. Every time they had a success, a piece of Zaha had been sold or worked away. Leo felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, a physical manifestation of a realization he wasn't prepared for. He looked at his father, the disgraceful mechanic, and for the first time, he didn't see a liability. He saw a man who had been a hero in a story that Leo had refused to read. "We have to stay here," Leo said suddenly. "What?" Arya and Elena said in unison. "The car is gone. We have no money. The next bus doesn't run until Tuesday," Leo said, his eyes fixed on Zaha. "And Dad isn't going to sign anything. Are you, Dad?" "I'm not," Zaha said. "Then we wait," Leo said, sitting down on the bottom step of the porch. "We wait until you see us. Not as investments, but as your children." "I don't have time for this," Elena yelled. "I'm calling a car. I'll use my father's emergency credit." "There's no self-service here, Elena," Zaha said with a small, ghost of a smile. "The aesthetic here is strictly analog." This was the forced proximity. The three of them, the lawyer, the gallery owner, and the socialite, were trapped at a crumbling cottage with the man they had disowned. They were hungry, they were cold, and they were finally, for the first time in their lives, powerless. Zaha walked back into the cottage and hooked the screen door. "There's a pump around back if you're thirsty. And there's some old blankets in the shed. Deal with the night however you can." The door shut. The golden children are finally out of their element. Do you think a few days of hunger and cold will actually change them? Or are they just going to resent Zaha even more? If you were Zaha, would you let them sleep in the shed, or would you turn them away entirely? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. As the stars began to poke through the dark velvet of the coastal sky, the trio sat on the porch steps. Elena was sobbing quietly. Arya was staring at her empty hands. And Leo? Leo was looking at the ledger, reading the entries over and over again, finally learning the true cost of his life. The forced proximity had begun. The walls were gone. The money was gone. And all that was left was the sound of the ocean and the crushing weight of the truth. The night at the blue horizon was not a night of sleep. It was a night of endurance. The temperature dropped until the sea mist turned into a biting dew that clung to the trio's expensive clothes. Elena had eventually retreated to the back seat of the truck driver's cab, which was still parked a mile away, leaving Leo and Arya alone on the porch. As the first gray light of dawn began to bleed into the horizon, the screen door creaked open. Zaha stepped out, not with a checkbook, but with a battered metal lockbox, the kind used for storing old deeds and family secrets. He didn't speak. He walked to the small wooden table, sat down, and opened the box. He pulled out a stack of letters, their envelopes yellowed and brittle, tied together with a piece of twine. "You want to know why I kept it a secret?" Zaha asked, his voice low, blending with the sound of the crashing waves. "You want to know why I let you believe the money came from lucky investments and distant relatives?" Arya looked up, her face pale and streaked with dried salt. "Because you wanted to control us, Dad. That's what everyone says. Money is power, and you wanted to be the one holding the leash." Zaha gave a sad, dry laugh. "Control? Arya, if I wanted control, I would have stayed at the wedding and watched you beg. No, I kept it a secret because of your mother." Leo sat up, his interest piqued. "Mom? What does she have to do with the workshop accounts?" Zaha pulled a letter from the stack and handed it to Leo. It was dated 15 years ago, just months before Martha had passed away. "Your mother was a woman of immense pride," Zaha said. "She came from nothing, just like I did. But she had a dream that her children would never feel the stain of the working class. She used to say, 'Zaha, if they know we are bleeding for them, they will feel guilty. And guilt is a weight that prevents a bird from flying. I want them to be light. I want them to think the world belongs to them by right, not by sacrifice.'" Leo read the letter. It was Martha's handwriting, elegant and shaky. "Zaha, please," the letter read. "Promise me they will never see you under the cars. Promise me when they go to those fancy schools, they think it's because they are brilliant, not because you worked 24 hours straight. Let them be proud, Zaha. Let them be elite. Don't let my death or your sweat be the price of their happiness." "I made her a promise on her deathbed," Zaha whispered, his eyes fixed on the ocean. "I promised her I would be the invisible man, I would fund your lives, I would build your pedestals, and I would stay in the shadows so you could shine without the shame of a father with grease under his fingernails." Arya took the letter from Leo, her fingers trembling. "So, the anonymous patron for my gallery, that was the invisible man. I created the Martha Foundation 2 weeks after she died," Zaha said. "Every penny I made from the mill, every engine I rebuilt at night, went into that account. I lived in that workshop apartment, eating canned beans and washing my clothes in a bucket, so I could send $5,000 a month to the foundation. I wanted you to feel like the universe was rewarding your talent. I wanted you to have the confidence that only comes from thinking you've earned it all yourself." He reached into the box and pulled out a small, velvet-lined case. Inside was a gold locket, the one Martha had worn every day of her life. "But there was a cost," Zaha continued, his voice cracking for the first time. "By making myself invisible, I made myself disposable. I followed her wish so well that you forgot I was a person at all. You started to see the money as a natural law, like gravity. And you started to see me as a visual stain that didn't fit the aesthetic I was paying for." "We didn't know, Dad," Leo said, his voice a choked whisper. "You didn't want to know, Leo," Zaha countered. "There were signs. Did you never wonder why I never bought a new truck? Did you never wonder why I didn't come to your law school graduation? It wasn't because I was busy. It was because I didn't have the $200 for the hotel room after I paid your final tuition installment." Arya let out a sob, a raw, jagged sound that she buried in her hands. She remembered that day. She had called him a hermit for missing the graduation. She had told her friends he was antisocial and obsessed with his tools. "I kept the secret to protect your pride," Zaha said, closing the box with a definitive thud. "But at the wedding, when that girl, your fiancé Leo, screamed at me to leave, I realized I wasn't protecting your pride anymore. I was feeding your arrogance. I was honoring a dead woman's wish by destroying my living children's souls. I had turned you into people your mother would have been ashamed of. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of 15 years of deception and sacrifice. The $425,000, Arya said, looking at the box. Is that all that's left? It's the last of it, Zaha said. It was supposed to be the final gift. The legacy fund. I was going to give it to you yesterday. I was going to tell you the truth, thinking you were finally ready to know who I was. But then I got your text, Arya. And then I saw the seating chart. He stood up, the old wood of the porch groaning under his weight. I didn't take the money back to be cruel, Zaha said, looking at them both. I took it back because the invisible man is dead. From now on, if you want a life, you have to build it. If you want a reputation, you have to earn it. And if you want a father, you're going to have to find him in the man, not the bank account. Suddenly, the sound of a car horn shattered the moment. Elena had returned, driving her father's luxury sedan, the one he'd finally sent for her. She pulled up to the cottage, the tires kicking up dust. Leo, Arya, get in, she shouted, not even getting out of the car. My father fixed it. He talked to the bank. We don't need him. We can sue for the trust funds. Get in the car. We're leaving this dump. Arya looked at the car, then back at the yellowed letters on the table. She looked at the gold locket, the piece of her mother that Zaha had guarded like a treasure. Go on, Zaha said, his voice devoid of expectation. The high society is calling. You can go back to the lie. You can spend the next 10 years in court trying to sue a man who has nothing left but a workshop and a clear conscience. Leo looked at Elena. He saw the coldness in her eyes, the same coldness that had been in his own just 48 hours ago. He saw the aesthetic he had worshipped, and for the first time, it looked incredibly, terrifyingly empty. I'm staying, Leo said. What? Elena screamed from the car. Leo, don't be a fool. He's broken. He's just a bitter old man. No, Leo said, turning to face her. He's the only one in this family who isn't a fraud. Go home, Elena. Tell your father I won't be joining the firm. I think I need to learn how to fix things. Arya stood up slowly. She picked up the letter in Martha's handwriting. I'm staying too. My gallery, let them sue me. Let them take the name. I want to know what it feels like to build something that actually belongs to me. Elena stared at them in disbelief. She slammed the car into gear, sprayed gravel all over the porch, and roared away, leaving a cloud of dust that quickly vanished in the sea breeze. Zaha didn't smile. He didn't offer a hug. He simply picked up his metal box and walked toward the shed. There's an old engine in there, Zaha said over his shoulder. A 1965 Mustang block. It's seized up, rusted through, and most people say it's junk. But if you're staying, you might as well learn how to get the grease off your hands. Zaha finally revealed the why. He wasn't just being a martyr. He was keeping a promise to a dying wife. Do you think Martha's wish was a mistake, or was it Zaha's fault for following it too long? And now that Leo and Arya have chosen the hard path, do you think they'll actually stick it out? Let me know in the comments. This is where the real transformation begins. The sun was fully up now, a bright, unforgiving light that revealed every crack in the cottage and every wrinkle on Zaha's face. Leo and Arya followed their father toward the shed. They weren't wearing silk and lace anymore. They were wearing the weight of their own history. The mystery was unveiled. The wound was open. And for the first time in 15 years, the Vance family was finally telling the truth. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.